Welcome to everyone. I'm talking about a problem today that is probably the biggest misunderstood problem that exists in the world today. And it's about how we learn, how we develop skills. I got into it because I got 4 children, and the eldest of 4 was different to the other 3. She had the same teachers, the same school, the same parents, same everything. She even worked as hard, but she couldn't learn. And that journey was a very difficult journey. Now, I'm an entrepreneur. I love finding new solutions for things. So I was solving problems in various industries, and without trying, I was kind of turning the industries upside down. So I guess I've got a fairly different, uneducated brain that finds solutions because I have to. And one day I was driving along in the north of England, and I got a phone call to say that Susie had attempted to take her life. I was flying at the time. My businesses were going well. I got cars and boats and helicopters and all the trappings, but a daughter that didn't want to live. It was a 2-hour journey back to the hospital. And during that journey, I couldn't get hold of anyone. I didn't know what was happening to her. And you can imagine, on a 2-hour journey, your guilt just builds up and up and up and up. And I was going over everything I'd done with her. I'd taken her to the best experts, tried this, tried that, changed schools, changed teachers, changed everything, and nothing was working. But for 2 hours, I was thinking, what else could I have done? Well, I knew that whatever industry I went into, I kind of was pretty good at finding the people that could turn it upside down and come up with totally new solutions. And it dawned on me that here I was trying to make money, trying to change industries, and I've got a daughter that was so unhappy. The time had come for me to turn my whole life around and direct it towards helping Susie and others. I got to the hospital, and through God's mercy, she was coming round. But I'd made my mind up, and it changed my life. So to this day, I've ended up becoming a neurological researcher with negligible education, except what I've learned this last 20 years by talking to some of the greatest neuroscientists, some of the most amazing educationalists and psychologists, professors and academics. So what I'm going to share with you now, this next 30 or 40 minutes, is everything I've learned along the way and how it could apply to your family, your client base, and so on. And everything else I know that I can't fit into this next short session, which these wonderful guys have set up, I will make available to you. I just want the world to become a better place by sharing all of this. So what are we talking about? Well, initially I was focused on reading difficulties. That I thought was the top of the pinnacle of all the issues my daughter had. I mean, she actually had poor reading, poor concentration. Today, I'm sure she'd have been diagnosed as Asperger's or autistic and so on. So she'd got the lot. But the fact is that as we look around us, 1 in 4 children have struggles with reading. Some, not all, have been diagnosed with dyslexia. 1 in 5 have poor attention. Some, but by no means all, have been labeled ADHD. Some, about 1 in 10, have got a degree of physical clumsiness. 1 in 20 have got a degree of social clumsiness, and so on. So there's actually quite a big chance that someone close to you, maybe in your family, fits into that category. You know they're kind of bright, but they're not doing well at school. They're underachieving, and therefore totally misunderstood. Well, by the end of this session, I want you to understand them far better than before, understand the root cause and what you can do about it, and how what I'm talking about then goes on to enhance other cognitive skills and functions, and even athletic performance, because it's all linked to a critical part of the brain that's been totally misunderstood. So if you look at the history of trying to help learning difficulties, there's lots of educationalists and there's lots of teachers doing really good work, and you get educational psychologists and sometimes you get child psychiatrists in the mix. But there's no neurologist there. And yet the research that's been coming out this last 20 or 30 years is all about the neurology of learning. And that's why I think this fits so beautifully with the chiropractors I've met and your whole chiropractic process. It just fits so well. So I'm going to try and link all that together for you now. But have you ever wondered, how is it that most billionaires don't read? Many people in prison don't read. And on one end of the spectrum, you can get someone with autism who's just got their PhD. And at the other end of the same spectrum, you've got someone else with autism who can't function. They can't even dress, speak, and so on. Isn't there a lot of confusion in this whole thing? Well, we're going to unscramble that now. And I want to share all the research. So that's why I got into it, because my daughter needed a solution. She was told she'd got to learn to live with it. And of course, that was because nobody was looking for a solution. There's even a hatred towards the whole idea of cure in this area. Parents want it. Academics don't seem to want it that are already in this industry. I was very fortunate because I very quickly, in my manic approach to this problem, I came across some amazing academics. One of them was a professor now at Edge Hill University, Professor Rod Nicholson. He's become my mentor over the last 20 years. He quickly pointed me to the work of someone at Harvard Medical School, work that had been overlooked. Professor Jeremy Schmarman. He is the grandfather of our current understanding of the cerebellum. And what he was telling the world was, look, the cerebellum, brain-body connection, call it what you like. He was starting to call it the brain within the brain, or the brain's brain. Wow, that's a big statement. At this point, everyone was thinking the cerebellum is all about coordinating balance and body movements, and that's all it does. And he was saying, no, that's just a tiny part of what it's doing. It's only 10% by volume of the brain, but it's got 75% of brain cells. And when you've got 75% of brain cells in something, it's pretty important. And that's what the world was missing. But what I was learning from them was all of the symptoms that Susie had. No, that's not true. Most of the symptoms that Susie had, the root cause was in the cerebellum. So my approach was, okay, I've got to find the root cause and then I've got to cure the root cause. So it was looking pretty good. The cerebellum looked like it was the root cause because the cerebellum is responsible for coordinating all processes, skills, if you like. And what we were seeing was that Susie, the reason Susie couldn't read was not because she hadn't got fundamental intelligence, rather the opposite. But what she hadn't got was eye tracking to make reading possible. And in a minute, I'll show you some videos of what happens with people that struggle with reading. When you analyze autism, dyslexia, ADHD, all of these things, what really is holding people back is underdeveloped skills or processes. If it's autism, of course, there's nearly always the social element. They don't pick up social cues. They can't take them into account very easily when they're socializing. With ADHD, there's a huge problem with controlling impulsivity, and very often a severe problem with controlling attention. With dyslexia, there's a great lack in being able to track your eyes smoothly so that you can read easily. And all of these symptoms overlap. There's been some wonderful categorization of which symptoms equals which diagnosis, but the overlap is so wide, it's almost a waste of time. So what I was seeing was, in all of these people that we were looking at, was they're either a natural or not. A natural at sport or not, a natural at reading or not, a natural at concentration or not, a natural at social skills or not. And if you look at Prince Philip, he's still not a natural at social skills to this day. So extra practice doesn't actually mean that you're going to get there. It looked like these skills were hitting a glass ceiling. Eye tracking skills failed to develop beyond a certain point. They never became natural, and reading for the whole of their lives stays poor, weak. So I was looking for ways of how do you break through this glass ceiling so that all of these skills, all of these processes naturally carry on developing so that they become natural at them. Well, if the cerebellum is the root cause of those, we needed to find out how we could change the cerebellum. But there were a few symptoms that weren't linking. So, for instance, in people with learning difficulties, a high proportion suffer with frustration. or poor emotional control. Many, not all, have poor memory. Some have very poor organization skills. Some have complete lack of control of impulses. Those didn't fit the cerebellum, but I'll come back later to how we found that there was a causal link directly to the cerebellum. It's really exciting. So when we were thinking, how do we change the cerebellum? The first offer I had was, well, give them psychiatric drugs. That wasn't ideal for me. I wanted something that was lasting, with no side effects, and more natural. Now, I got a clue. I'm right now, I'm right next to a farm, and occasionally you might hear the lambs. The lambs would finish being born this week. The whole flock's had them now, and you might hear them in a bit. But when those lambs are born, within seconds, they're feeding, they're walking around. The next day, they're skipping around the field. Their cerebellum is as highly developed as a human baby's is after 2 years, but they're highly developed at birth. So I was beginning to understand, even by talking to my farmer, the neighbor, about the big difference between human development and animal development. And when I asked the question of the professors, how do we change the cerebellum when someone has got these issues and they've hit this glass ceiling in specific skill development? The best answer I got was from Professor Rod Nicholson, who he said, do you know what? If you do anything regularly enough, you will eventually change the cerebellum. Okay, great. What like? He said, exercise. Which exercise? Haven't got a clue. So that started me on a journey, and I opened my first clinic. Eventually I had 57 clinics, which I was funding to do research. And we did research at that time on 45,000 people. Why? Because everybody's brain is so different. And there was never going to be a one-size-fits-all solution to developing the cerebellum to overcome these issues, to break through that glass ceiling. I needed to take on folk with the appropriate skills. I needed to be able to test how their cerebellum was developed. So we bought huge posturography machines. One of them had been developed by NASA because it was reported, they've denied it since, but it was reported at the time that astronauts, when they go into, when they leave the Earth's gravitational pull, they start writing backwards. Not all of them, but many of them did. So they developed this equipment, and one of the roles was to find out why this was happening. We bought very expensive oculomotor testing equipment, and we had to create dark rooms to put it in, blackout rooms, because then we could look at these children, mainly some adults as well, and find out exactly what's happening to their neurology. So I took on physiotherapists and audiologists and balance specialists and so on and so on. And we put this huge team together, and they started giving out loads and loads of exercises. It wasn't long before some of those exercises were bringing results. And it boiled down to the fact that after a few months, we were giving everybody 10 minutes of exercise twice a day. And we got so good at this, within a few weeks, we were seeing results. You know, and I'd be in my office in the clinic, and there'd be another squeal of delight in one of the testing rooms, and I'd go through, and this child had started to read. This child had started to play sport, and he absolutely couldn't before. My own daughter started to read within 3 months, and she was 27 years old at the time. So we were getting results, but we needed to do huge numbers of tests. So hence the 45,000 and collecting huge amounts of research data on it. So this was early on. I'll come in a minute to how we were doing it and what the science behind it was. But people like Trevor McDonald picked up on it, and he sent a whole film crew. He sent people that I knew about that had got genuine issues. He sent a whole bunch of people that I didn't know about that were making up the issues they got. And we tested them all, and we had to send away the ones that that he was trying to set us up with, because they didn't fit our research model that we were developing. And he put out this incredible program, Dyslexia, the Miracle Cure. Will you imagine? The academics involved in the dyslexia world went through the roof. The families loved it. The teachers loved it. And we ended up with our clinics were rammed full for years after, just on the back of that program. But what shocked me was British Telecom was crashed at the end of that program. There are so many families out there desperately needing this help. they're confused, their child is misunderstood, their questions are asked about whether they're really intelligent, whether they're being lazy, questions have been asked about whether the parents are doing enough at home for them, all those things, all wrong. We now know the root cause. So what were we actually doing? Well, what I found was, by looking through the literature, there were wonderful pieces of literature, rather like pieces of a jigsaw, but nobody had done the jigsaw. There was research showing how the type of exercises that change the cerebellum. There's research showing the implications of the cerebellum, the role of the cerebellum in eye tracking and auditory processing and other cognitive functions. Nobody pieced all this together. So we developed a program of very specific exercises that could be customized every day to deliver the right sensory stimulation in the right way to get the cerebellum functioning. And how do we do that? Well, what's also obvious from the literature is the link between the vestibular system and the cerebellum is huge. Plasticity seems to be created in the cerebellum when the vestibular is stimulating it. So let me give you an extreme example. If you take an autistic child that is really struggling with processing in life, and you take them to Disney, you take them to the park when you can, we can't at the moment, but take them to the park and they go on the swings and slides. You take them swimming, and when they're young, you're throwing them up and down in the air. That's when they come alive. That's when they love what's happening. That's when they smile and laugh. The rest of the time they don't. But what's happening is their links between vestibular and cerebellum are underdeveloped. So very little sensory stimulation from the vestibular is arriving in the cerebellum so it can be used. So the cerebellum itself ceases to function. Another quite famous psychiatrist has done work with us and said that we're the only intervention that increases blood flow in the cerebellum. So what are we doing? We're stimulating the vestibular. In other words, every one of our exercise has a balance element to it. And then we're giving a coordination activity that's a challenge for the cerebellum. And we put the two together. Now, obviously, there's lots of different types of vestibular stimulation. There's rotation, there's lateral movement, there's vertical movement, and so on. And there's obviously very different levels, degrees of stimulation. Too much stimulation is dangerous. Too little stimulation is ineffective. So we've got to get the right stimulation, the right level of stimulation, and put it together with the right coordination activity to get the desired result. What we're trying to do is increase density of gray matter in the cerebellum. And there's some wonderful research out there showing the precise types of exercise that do increase the density of gray matter. So we were able to, that was another piece of our jigsaw that we kept adding to, and we were ending up with this beautiful picture. And it wasn't just a picture, it was changing people's lives. But what we were seeing was we were giving them far better skills, far better processes. So usually within a couple of months, reading was getting easier. Listening and retaining what they were hearing was getting easier. Some children that got to the age of 12 and couldn't ride a bike were saying, I'm now riding a bike. Those that were shy because their verbal fluency was poor were beginning to get more confident. What we worked out was that confidence happens when skills are fully developed. You're in the zone in sport when you're not having to think about something. So this hardwiring of skills and processes, creating a computer program that was up here in the cortex, requiring no thought, was what we were aiming for. When we do that, we realize that there was a second huge benefit. When someone is not good at something, let's take eye tracking, the very thing we started with. When eye tracking is itself not automatized, the thinking brain has to be involved. When you're learning to ride a bike, you know what to do, you're thinking about it, and you're falling off. Because the processing here is at least 100,000 times slower than when you've got a hardwired process happening up in the cortex. So here is very slow. Prefrontal cortex working memory capacity is very limited. We can typically get no more than 7 things in there. But that speed of processing is what it's all about. So if there's any element of thought needed, because the cerebellum has not finished its job of hardwiring the process that you're using, then this is going to slow it down. In the case of riding a bike, it's going to make it so slow, you cannot work out how far to lean over when you're going around a corner, because before you've done that, you've fallen off. But the good news is, and this was a double whammy we didn't expect, when the cerebellum does its job and breaks through those glass ceilings and gives you that range of everyday skills in a much more hardwired form, so you can process them here in the cortex rather than here in the working memory, by freeing up this, it makes a huge difference to your whole cognitive processing. And that is so exciting, because when this is freed, you're less anxious, you've got more emotional control. If there's no space there, you lose emotional control, frustration, anxiety, even panic attacks, depression, and so on and so on. But this is also the area where inhibitory control takes place, where attention control takes place. So when this is full of stuff that shouldn't be there, you get all of these cognitive functions improving significantly. And that was so exciting, because we were discovering that whilst the cerebellum could only explain some of the symptoms of these learning issues, the rest of them were being explained by the freeing up of space in the prefrontal cortex. So all of the functions, the executive functions that happen there, were happening in the way they should. So we were solving this second set of issues that initially we could not connect directly to the cerebellum. Scientists are still arguing, is the cortex 1,000,000 times faster or 40,000 times faster than here? I couldn't care. It's a big number, and plenty big enough to explain what we're seeing. But understanding what confidence is suddenly became a wonderful aha moment, because confidence happens when all of the processes you're using at any time requires no thinking brain capacity. Isn't that awesome? So we now know where confidence lies. But we also know where potential lies. I get angry with people who just shallowly say, oh, your child's got potential. Because they never ever say, and this is where it is, and this is how much you've got, and this is what you do to bring it into play. Potential is useless if you never ever find it. You know, we've all got £1 billion between our ears, but if we don't find it, then it ain't going to be much use to us. We can't spend it. So we now know that potential exists in the cerebellum. And I'm going to dive briefly in, for a minute or two, into that particular thing. I can't go really deeply into it today, but I'll do it some other time if you want it, because this is so exciting. We kept seeing people make rapid progress. So all those people we saw went from not reading to reading. There's no way could they have learnt in that time. So what was happening? A very famous rugby player went from being a great winger but not being able to kick to being a great kicker. He'd given up practicing. So what was happening? So this rapid progress needed some explanation. And we went back to the neurologist to say, what's going on? And, you know, they couldn't give us a proper answer until about 4 years ago. Then some wonderful research came out about the cerebellum saying, if the cerebellum is unable to develop skills, it still retains all of the attempts to create that skill. In other words, if you've been trying to learn to read or concentrate the whole of your life, every time you try, the cerebellum is actually creating 2 files for that particular skill or process. One file is called the internal model. In other words, what's it look like? What are you trying to achieve? And what's it look like when you get this right? So it creates that file. It creates another file called the inverse model, which is what are the instructions the brain needs to give to the various parts of the brain and body so that you end up with what it should look like. And those steps are in reverse order. 2 files, internal model, what's it look like when it's done right? Inverse model, what steps in reverse order must the brain carry out? Those files are there even though the cerebellum hasn't been able to complete the process and convert the hardwired program that requires no thought, that gives you precision, gives you full automaticity. Isn't that awesome? So we now know where potential is. It's hiding there in the cerebellum in the shape of 2 files of partly developed skills waiting to be finished off. Does that make some sense? So, well, let's talk about athletes for a second. What athletes are looking for is consistency. They're looking for precision. They're looking for emotional control. They're looking for being able to be at the same level of consistency at the end of a game as they are at the start, so there's no mental tiring. And of course, they want to be in the zone. What explains all of those things? The ability of the cerebellum to break through any glass ceilings and take that skill to as close to perfection as possible. Same is true of the elderly. We had a professor came to me about 3 years ago now and says, I want to do some research on your program on people in decline. I said, aren't kids more important because they got their whole life ahead of them? He said, well, look, really wonderful academic. He said, look, if you can prove to everyone that you're doing this for the elderly when they're in decline, folk are going to accept that everybody else are going to benefit from it. So he did that research, and he only actually used 10% of our program, but he got it peer reviewed and published because the results were superb. We increased their ability, recovered their ability to balance and be automatically coordinated. We increased their confidence, of course, because they'd now got the automaticity back. We increased their memory functions. We increased their ability to read, even in some cases. So if it works in the elderly, guess what? According to him, everyone's going to believe that it works everywhere. Well, of course, we've done a lot of research on all ages. And where's my heart? Well, my heart is still, I want my Susie, my daughter, to have the best life, and every other family I've ever bumped into since. So I'm just going to show you some pictures now, so you can get a clue about what we're talking about. What I'm going to show you next is actually an eye tracking bar. When we set up the clinics first, we had to set up special rooms and huge equipment. It's now in a bar like this that plugs into your USB. We've had to do a huge amount of software around this, but it's something simple. And if ever any of you wanted it in your own clinics, then let us know, and it's something we can easily arrange. So let me see if I can share with you. See if I can share with you. Yes, this is a young lad called Mikey. Mikey came to us in November of last year. Beginning of December last year, and this was his eye tracking. So if you look at the chart, he had to focus on the start button to get it started, so his eyes went down to the start, and you can see all the messing around that his eyes were doing. His eyes could not smoothly track the lines. You see his reading speed down here is 6.4 seconds. That's how long it took him to traverse that. But it's not just the time, it's how much he took in. He actually took in very, very little. Mikey was being homeschooled at this point because he was struggling so badly at school. Nobody had looked at his eye tracking skills. When we did the work on 45,000, it was over 97% of those that struggled with reading had poor eye tracking skills, but nobody was testing that. That's kind of scary. So that was Mikey. I'll show you in a minute what happened afterwards. Let's see if I can find his graph. This is his graph from 2 months, just 2 months later. 2 months of doing our program. And as you can see, after he'd moved from the start button down, his eyes went pretty smoothly right along the line, and he did it in 4.5 seconds, much faster. But the important thing was he was now taking it in. In the previous graph, where his eyes were going all over the place, his thinking brain was full of processing his eye movements. And his eye movements, and that, because that was full, his thinking brain was full, when he read a word, he got nowhere to store it. So he could eventually work out what the word was and move on to the next word, and the same thing again, unscramble the letters, work out what the word was, and store it in his thinking brain, and move on to the next word. But every time he stored it, within a split second, the thinking brain was full of processing his eye movement. So he got to the end of the sentence and had to start again. You get to the end of the chapter, and have to start again because he wasn't taking anything in, because the working memory was so full of stuff that shouldn't be there, and that's his storage space. So you can imagine Mikey's parents are thrilled. He's wanting to go back to school now. But another important thing happened, and this was the most important thing for Mikey. He's in Minneapolis. In fact, his mum works at a chiropractic clinic in Minneapolis, so that's how she heard about it. His sport coach has put him in to the next league. So the first thing we do, and if you had this in your clinic, you can do that process with clients. It takes about 15 minutes, and they see some very tangible results. Have a box of Kleenex there, because often it's a huge relief to mum, and they get very angry with the school. Why has nobody ever told me this before? They've said all sorts of things, never that this is his problem. When you can prove that it's a skill that's not developed that's causing the problem, they love it. Well, the next thing we do is we do a neurological assessment. This was developed by Sheffield University, and it's a whole range of neurological tests. Let me see if I can show you that quickly so you can get a sense of the report that we do. This is the report that we do. And in this report, you can see that, if you can read it, visual working memory, we're measuring auditory working memory, concentration, memory recall, and reading. And there's a whole range of self-assessment. So these bars are where they fit on the centile graph right now. And this here, the purple bit, this is the zone that we expect to get you to. In other words, from all the data we've got, if you're starting here, with your age and so on, we expect to get you in this zone. Well, between you and me, we like to under-promise and over-deliver, so many exceed that. And the changes are huge. You'll notice here memory recall was poor. This was someone that really did not do well in tests and exams. Knew the stuff, couldn't pull it out when it mattered because of poor memory recall. As you go through the program, every 30 days, we repeat this and we show the changes, which is thrilling. And you know, the average changes that people make, if they start below the 50th centile, on average, we increase their centiles by 30. In other words, somebody that starts on 40, we take them up to 70. If they start on 20, we take them up to 50. That is huge. That's our average. And are we curing? No, let's not use that word. Are we making a huge difference to their life? Absolutely. And the wonderful thing about the cerebellum is when you learn to ride a bike, you don't lose it. I put my bike away literally for 25 years. And when I pulled it out of the shed, dusted it down, I could ride, because when the cerebellum does something, it is absolutely lasting. So that's a quick summary of what we do. The exercises we deliver on a phone, a tablet, a PC, and we do it all for you. So we work out exactly what the sensory stimulations are, what the exercises are. We get feedback every day. And then we use artificial intelligence to adjust the exercises so the stimulation extend and we maximize the speed of process. Typically, the thing takes 6 to 12 months, 10 minutes twice a day for 12 months. Get a coach all along the way to do it. And if you introduce them in your clinic, you can be that coach that touches base with them once a month. We give you all the data analyzed so you can easily feed it back to them. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for healthcare providers, chiropractors particularly, to latch onto this and add a completely new service. How much progress are we actually making? Well, when we did the 45,000, because we hadn't got enough data, we gave them a money back guarantee. Nobody complied with the program and asked for their money back, which is a little scary. So what does that mean? Well, let me just give you some stats. We've just done some analysis of all the people that have been through our latest totally online program. And if their compliance was 75% or more, and they'd done the program for 6 months, then every single one of them had improved in 3 or more of those areas I showed you on our assessment. 95% had improved in 5 or more areas, 90% in 6 or more. And then the bad news was only 5% had improved on 10 or more. But we're making a huge amount of change in a way that I don't know of any other program can, because unless you address the cerebellum, unless you stimulate it with vestibular, unless you do that right in an individualized way, you are not likely to find all the potential. So if I look at the figure of 90%, and I say, well, 90% of our users improve noticeably, measurably in 6 or more areas. And the wonderful thing is, the changes in the subjective data are very similar in centile terms to the changes in neurological data. You'd hope that would be the case, but it actually is the case. We've just done some research on at-risk teenagers. This was another bright idea of an academic. They say, let's take some 14-year-olds that are at risk of dropping out of school. And I said, you ain't got a prayer of getting them to comply with an exercise program. They've given up. They said, well, let us try. They gave them 10% of the program, and they're just going to publish that right now. And this here is the before. This is the comparison between the Zing group, that's the blue lines, with the gray group, which is the at-risk, which is the placebo group. The changes were huge right across the board, including anxiety, obviously including reading and physical coordination and so on. Is this all making sense? I wouldn't be surprised if some of you have got someone in your family who'd like to benefit from. Well, in that case, talk to us, and there will be a very, very special deal for the Lions of Chiropractic. I've so much respect for what Connor is doing and Mike is doing. I want to support it. I love working with chiropractors. I've been approached by a number in America, and they're all on board and using it in their clinics now. And within a very few weeks, reporting incredible results. And what they love about it, they can actually show them the results. They can show them the eye tracking. That's a game changer for mums. It's an aha moment. And then a few weeks later, they're showing them transformed eye tracking. And guess what? The mum is saying, wow, the concentration has improved. And one of our charts on the eye tracking test shows their ability to maintain focus. The ability to read is shown on the one I showed you. So whether it's your own child, whether it's your own clinic, and you want to do something for all of your patients, let us know. If you go to our website, which is www.zingperformance.com, you'll see a special page for healthcare providers, and there's a lot of useful stuff on there. You can download an abstract from my book, or you can get it from Amazon, Stop Struggling in School. That's a good read for a mum or a dad. And if you want the science, you'll find the downloads for this on our website. And this is one written by a professor that's really deep. And if you want a cure for lack of sleep in these difficult times, this is a great document to go through. So all of those are available for downloads. We want to help you folk. We want to support you. We know I've not met a chiropractor that doesn't get this when they look at it. So I've got huge respect for the profession. So contact me at Wynford at zingperformance.com. That's WYNFORD. It's a Welsh one. WYNFORD at zingperformance.com. Send me an email. I will answer all of your questions. Go to the website, zingperformance.com. Go to the healthcare providers page. You'll find some useful downloads there. But anything that isn't enough information for you, ask, and we will give it to you. Well, look, I hope this gives you some hope about someone in your family, hope for your the families that in your patient list. And if you want to work with us, we can't accommodate everybody, but we can accommodate a few more chiropractors in the near term. We've got a great training program that's accredited by the British Accreditation Council. I'd love to work with you. Connor, Mike, thank you so much for this opportunity to share the real hope. I hope it's made enough sense. If it hasn't, I'll follow it up with some information to all your listeners.
Great, Wynford. Thank you very much. We do have a few questions on the lines. We do. So Nina asked, she has a son who has eye tracking issues and hypermobility, etc. And she had some difficulty getting him to comply with exercises. So did you have any tips on getting people to comply with exercises?
That is always a challenge. And we find with children like that are hyperactive, the first few weeks are difficult. After a few weeks, they tend to realize things are getting easier. And they tend to realize, actually, this crazy thing that mum's getting me to do is worthwhile. So it does require a bit of the warrior mum mentality to say, this is happening because it's really important for your future, and make them stick at it. So there's no magic bullet. I'm not going to start selling drugs that you can take and make them swallow. I'm afraid this is, you've got to make them do this for 10 minutes twice a day. You can make it fun. As long as you can get them to do at least half of it, you're going to get them started on the process. So be as diligent as you can. That wasn't very much help, was it, really?
I understand. It's difficult to address that one. You spoke obviously a little bit about some of the athletes you've helped in the past.
Yeah.
I know there's been a few quite high profile ones. I know you don't want to name drop too many, but maybe just talk about their experience.
Well, to be fair, the athletes have been absolutely wonderful. You know, the ice hockey player, Jordan Petrus, he was in his last year of playing at the age of 31. So he'd got all his detailed stats. He did the program and he had the best year of his career. And all the stats said, every aspect of his speed, of his running, of his accuracy, of his consistency, of his kick, of his passing, and so on, was best ever. Then Stuart Bingham came to me. If anyone watches snooker, Stuart Bingham came to me 4 years ago now, and he said, like, I'm 38. Have I missed it? I've never been world champion. Well, I said, when's the next world championship? He said, it's in April. And this was in December. So I said, I'll do a deal with you. You put Zing Performance on your shirt for free, and I'll give you a program. Well, he rang me up about 2 o'clock in the morning, 4 months later, saying, I've just won. So I said, actually, I was watching Stuart, and the BBC commentators were saying, what's happened to Stuart Bingham? He's got such control of his emotions. He's so in charge. And all we'd changed for him was those last bits of precision that he needed so that he could free up his working memory. So he was absolutely confident, feeling in control. And he was looking at Ronnie O'Sullivan saying, I'm beating you. And you could see that in his eyes. So what did we do? A tiny bit. He's done 8 hours practice every day for the last 25 years. He needs the credit for it. All we did was the final bit of wiring in the cerebellum, which finished off those skills that were sitting there in the internal model and the inverse model, waiting to be finished. And there's loads of others. Francis Whittington, the eventer, he was 35 when he became national champion for the first time. They give us far too much of the credit.
And
any more?
Yeah, there's a couple more. We have an example of some of the exercises that you give.
Do I? I do. Let me see if I can. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, here's one. Right. So we, excuse me. This is a fairly early one, and we give very detailed avatars showing exactly what to do. So folk have got, and we give feedback and so on, and we tell them what equipment they need, what mental tasks they do at the same time. And because every day we're monitoring what level of stimulation do they need, what type of vestibular stimulation, what type of coordination do they need, and we're progressively moving it on. So in the space of 6 months, somebody will probably have a total of 300 different exercises, or at least exercises with different levels, different combinations of, and there's loads more. I'm not going to bore you with all those now.
Perfect.
But that's an example. The app is very professional, lots of motivational feedback in it. So when healthcare providers put their patients on it, they haven't got to worry about what happens every day. This is great. This is something where the healthcare provider is earning without spending their own hours all the time. So this can, after an hour set up at the beginning, testing, setting them up, for the next 6 months, they just need an odd phone call now and again to say, congratulations, I see you've been taken off the special needs register, or that was the message I got last Friday from someone, just to congratulate them and keep the motivation up. So we're doing the donkey work, at least the artificial intelligence is, and we've spent obviously an enormous amount of man years building this. But we think it's pretty professional. People seem to like it. Dr. Sean Drake, you introduced me to, is doing it now and loving it. So thank you for that introduction.
Yeah, he's doing it. He's doing good. Got something for him to do while he's sat at home. We have one more question about concussion. Have you had any experience with concussion and potential recovery?
We have, but not enough to say, to give generalized advice. If anybody knows Daniel Amen of Amen Clinics, I know he's talked to me about whether this could be applicable for people that have had road traffic accidents or sporting injuries. So I think there's potential there, but I'm not going to promise something that I haven't got enough data to quote.
Great. And we've got one about the thoughts on making children read out loud in class as an educator, shall we say? Have you any?
Right, yeah, I've got a strong view on that. Don't do it. If a child has got an eye tracking issue, very often, not always, but very often they've got an auditory processing issue, because these symptoms overlap. Sometimes they've got a verbal fluency issue. So unless you know for certain that a child has got none of those issues, asking them to read out loud in class means that their working memory, and they've got poor eye tracking, their working memory is going to be full of trying to control their eyes. They're in overload already. Adding another process so they're listening to themselves and speaking at the same time, it's kind of cruel. And I know so many children that I've met in the process of helping them where they would actually make any excuse. They'd be ill, they'd run out, they'd make a noise, they'd get into trouble. They'd rather have a detention than read out loud in class. So it's a scary, scary thing for children that are struggling with reading and writing to do.
Great. And two more questions then, just to finish off. So first off, what was the cost of the eye tracking program for chiropractors to bring in the clinic? And two, is it available across Europe?
Yeah, good question. The first question, this equipment, you can actually buy it from this company, Tobii, very cheaply, but the software if you want to retain the data, the software is extremely expensive. They charge about $2,500. And then it needs the software we've developed to link it into our database and do all of the analysis and create those reports I showed you. So I'm afraid we are not allowed. Tobii won't let us sell it. We can rent it. I think it's something like $47 a month to rent it. But they would need to be attached to our whole program, because just having this on its own without something that solves the problem. But so I'll gladly talk about that. I'll tell you straight up what the whole program, if people pay for the whole program, it comes to just under £1,500 that's fully coached, totally individualized, all the support, all the tests, everything. And of course, if a chiropractor introduces it, the chiropractor gets paid for, quite appropriately, for everything they do, the testing and so on. So we share that revenue with the chiropractor because they're doing a critical part of the process. So we can rent this. Chiropractors are welcome to go through our training and access our whole programs. I can't sell it to you. Yeah, you could buy this from Tobii, but I'm afraid it wouldn't do what you wanted.
And is there the training and the program and everything else associated with the chiropractors being trained up? Is there a cost associated with that, or is that part of you signing on with the program?
Look, I so respect what you're doing. I'm going to make sure that we couldn't take on everybody, but some of the chiropractors that you have in your amazing Lions setup, we can take some of them on. What we normally say is, look, we'll give you the training for free if you commit to having at least 2 clients on this program. So it's that sort of thing. And then we throw all this sort of stuff in on, we have to rent that on a monthly basis. So we're trying to make it affordable and accessible to as many as possible. We can't take everybody on because we've got limited resources to do the training. But the training is probably around 12 hours in total. Most of it's online, some of it's face-to-face, so we can answer any interactive questions. Did that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. Thank you very much.
You asked about Europe. It's only in English at the moment. It's been developed so that it's easy to translate into other languages, but that translation process will take time. Portuguese and Spanish are looking like next, but that will be several months. English only at the moment, I'm afraid.
Okay, great. And any experience with stroke victims post-stroke? Is that the elderly population you were generally talking about, or?
Well, we were actually aiming in that to look at this early onset dementia and cognitive decline to see if we could reverse that. Ironically, where we started in our exercises was on some great research that had been done on rehabilitating stroke victims. So if there's going to be any recovery in stroke victims, then vestibular stimulation and the cerebellum is going to be involved. So the probability is that this might have some positive effect. We haven't done the work to prove it, but the principles are absolutely there. But you've got to remember, most of our exercises require that someone has got reasonable use of all of their limbs. So if the stroke damage has impaired their ability to balance and coordinate, it might be difficult for them to start.
Great. Okay, well, I think that is all of the questions then for today. Thank you again for coming on and sharing all of your knowledge with us, Wynford.